You are now listening to Creative Hora.
Hi everyone, welcome to Creative Hora. I'm Dalia,
And I'm Mary.
and we're so excited to welcome you back for another episode between friends. And I know we always like to start the conversation with a quick vibe check. So, friend, how are you doing? What's the vibe?
I know. I don't know why I felt just giggly just now, but that was funny. But how am I feeling? Let me see. Yeah, giggly was one, but I do think I use like humor and being giggly when I'm processing a lot.
Okay.
So it's interesting that like the immediate feeling right now at this moment, as soon as you asked that question, it was just like hee hee, like to giggle. But I know in the back end, it's just like that's how I guess cope when I'm processing. So I would say like giggly because of the feeling of processing. But what about you? What are you feeling? What's up with you?
Yeah, friend. Well, first of all, I love, that you're feeling giggly. I mean, that is a very sweet. I could feel it when you're like when we started and we hit record. You sent me some vibes and I wanted to laugh too and I had to hold it in. So, we're not going to go into a little like laugh attack at the moment. But
No,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting and that there's a lot of self-awareness there around what it means to you to feel giggly and in the aspects of, hey, I'm processing a lot and these are some of the ways that humor helps me process. But for myself, I would say that I'm feeling very grounded actually. And it's funny because when I'm feeling very grounded, my energy is actually tries to go all over the place, so I require more grounding because I just get really excited. There's like things that just bring me joy out of nowhere. Like it's the way that this morning I had my tea and the color was so pretty. I was like, oh, such a pretty color. The way that I was like walking down the street and there was this like homeless person that was singing like Blackbird, and I was like, could just hear the lyrics in my ear so strongly. And it's just like, yeah, I feel when I am very excited, you would think that I have to work harder to be grounded, but I feel very grounded. I feel very in tune. Like I'm picking up on these little signs, these little joyful moments. And I feel I feel happy about that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, talk about like the ultimate being present with sounds like with like all your senses with like the tea and then the color of the tea and then even the detail of the homeless person, singing. So like that sounds pretty cool having that ultimate presence in just your day to day. So I love that for you.
Thank you, friend. I appreciate that. But I know that for this conversation, we really wanted to talk about, a couple of different things, but specifically, talk a little bit about some of the imposter syndrome that comes with being, a creative, and some of the challenges that we've been working through in the past
Yeah.
year in the podcast in regards to really understanding, how we define creative within our day to day, but also as individuals, as we continue to build out this project.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that topic more. I know we've had lots of good reflections on our own, but would definitely love to share that with our audience. And then again, reflect on the reflections we've had. So, I mean, I guess when you're thinking about your journey in as a creative, what helps you kind of tune into your creativity so that the imposter syndrome doesn't kick in? Because I know we've had different realms where, I mean, specifically like in academia, where imposter syndrome is it's a very, very like prominent, especially when you're in a PWI. But I'm curious to hear more so in a non-academia way, where non-formal training. Um, would love to hear kind of what you mean or how that feels in the creative space. So yeah, what does that mean and look like for you, friend?
Yeah, friend, I really appreciate that question. And when I think about imposter syndrome, it really does manifest in multiple ways in the
Mm,
creative space for me.
mm,
The first way is that there is a detachment in the way that I view creativity in others and the way that I see it in myself.
mm,
So
mm,
I love seeing a creative in their flow. When I see like a creative in the flow, it just brings me so much joy. It uplifts me. And then I have a really hard time seeing that reflected back to myself. So
mm,
I would say that's probably one of the ways that I see it manifest,
mm,
where, the way that I feel towards a creative when they're in their flow, whether for example, I went to in an underground show with local artists
mhm,
in Oakland a couple weeks back. And
mhm,
seeing some of the rappers that were on the stage, I felt like I was like buzzing with them. I felt their energy, their vibrance, and I was like, oh my God, seeing a creative in tune like that is just so much brilliance and power. But
mhm.
there's such a disconnect in seeing that within myself.
Ah, I see. And I guess can you share a little bit more like what is that disconnect for you? What does it feel like? Or is it something that I guess I'm trying to understand in terms of is it because we associate or you associate creativity with a product, like in this case the artist was their product is their words, their lyrics, their rap or whatever the product is. So just curious to hear a little bit more about that disconnect that you're tapping into.
Yeah, friend. In regards to that, I think it could potentially be the product in regards
Mm,
to
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
there's some certain like things like music, like painting that are very like you think about those things and those
Yeah.
come to the forefront of creativity. But
Mhm.
with this journey on the podcast, and we've talked a lot about ownership on the podcast, like, yeah, we're taking
Yeah.
ownership, we
Yeah.
rebranded, we renamed,
Yeah.
and that was a creative process. But when we
Was.
were in the ground of that, I never saw that as we're in a flow, we're in a
Mm-hmm.
creative state.
Oh.
So those are the things that I started to realize that while there
Mm.
is more ownership over the podcast and there's more
Mm-hmm.
alignment with the name and the color, like creative aura makes sense for us.
Yeah.
I'm still disconnected with, viewing some of the things that we're doing as like part of our creative process.
Okay.
And
I see.
I
That
think that's
makes
where
sense.
some of the challenges are coming. But I'm curious, friend, do you have a different perspective on this? Like, how are you thinking about the creative process with creative aura?
Yeah, definitely. I do think I think well, I've identified as more like an earlier creative, or I think I used the when we were on our chat with the producer, kind of like, oh, we're I forget what I use, like amateur creatives per se. And then they kind of challenged us and like, well, you guys have created like 40 or 30 plus episode. I wouldn't call you guys as amateurs anymore. I mean, you guys are very much well into that creative process of talking with other creatives, having standalone episodes, rebranding, and that was a whole creative endeavor. So when I looked at it from like, when I took a step back and from a bird's eye perspective, I do think a lot of that imposter syndrome of as a creative for me comes in my more structured academia training that you go to school to be a creative, you study this to be a creative, whether you're in digital art or whether it's a creative writing or similar to how you're associating creativity with like a product. I think that's when it kicks in for me because by no means did I go to school for like a creative, career. I didn't have formal training, but I do think one challenge that I'm navigating, especially as we create together, is undoing those maybe and like old traditional ways of defining what it means to be a creative because it doesn't require formal training and it comes from within. I think a lot of times when we interview creatives who are really passionate about their artistry, their expression, a lot of it comes from within. It doesn't really matter if they went through a formal training or formal education on their creative outlet. It's more so like like the intention behind it, how they define creativity. And I think applying what we're learning from those creatives is something that I need to also bridge the gaps to, because I do agree with you that there's some disconnect there for me too, because of, I think, like just the old ways of thinking of what it means to be a creative. Um so yeah, I think that's where, yeah, we're on the same page. We're aligned in how we're, viewing ourselves, but I also think we're aligned in demystifying those old,
Mm-hmm.
maybe traditional definitions of what it means to be a creative. Because this is what our platform is for, to
Yes, yes,
highlight it.
friend.
So I do think it was a good reminder, like, good challenge from our producers, and to really call us in and like, hey, no, you guys are not amateurs anymore. Like, that's not true. That was a
Which,
definitely cool call in from our producer, Abdullah.
yeah, which friend, I'm so curious. How did it feel to be challenged by our producer when they're like, hey, Ashley, you are a creative and I think you need to flesh this out more?
Yeah, I like it. I think that's part of the creative flow, and that's part of, I think, as we continue this journey, especially for me, that is part of the creative flow, to be challenged, to be, and to have the different perspective, and that's what creativity is for me, is different ways of seeing things. We might see the same, like, for example, blue sky, but I see like a different cloud there, and they're able to see that, and I'm like, well, I see this, but they're like, well, I see this. So I welcome it. I mean, it's definitely something that helps me as a creative to see things with a different perspective, to look at it from a different light, but also to reflect the labels that perhaps I've internalized as a non-creative per se. Um,
Mm,
because I do think, again, I think it was a great reminder to give ourselves more credit than we do. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, I think it was great. It was great. I value it. I welcome all the challenges and the different perspectives. What about you? Like,
Definitely.
what were initial thoughts for you when you heard that?
Oh my gosh, friend. My first thought was like, what do you mean? I thought we already accepted we're creatives.
Yeah.
We recorded a full episode about
No, I know,
ownership
I
and
know, I know. Yeah.
yeah, so I will say the first moment I heard that, I was like, I was confused because I really
Hmm.
thought that we had in the process of taking ownership over the name, the brand, the color,
I
that felt
know,
like
I
we were
know.
owning our creativity and owning the podcast a bit more, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but what I realized upon deeper reflection was that we were doing all these things and we still, like you said, we weren't giving ourselves the credit of like, hey,
Hmm.
you've recorded 40 episodes, you've you have we have writers calls every Fridays. We're doing
Hmm. Hmm.
these things that that show that we are creatives. And in
Hmm.
even in the podcast and having a new brand, having a new name, there's still like so much potential to change, adapt, and like make the space our own and bring
Hmm.
more of
Hmm.
ourselves and our creativity into it. And having these one-on-one conversations with you, friend, is that, that next layer that we're continuing to build on. And I
Yeah.
guess, friend, I am so curious because you actually mentioned something that was really interesting and it kind of made me
Hmm.
reflect a little bit around some of the preconceived limitations, preconceived structures that I have in place when it comes to creativity. And you mentioned it from an academic perspective. So how do you break away from that, friend? Like how do you break away from your academic training? You got your master's in public health. You're definitely very academic forward.
Right,
So
right.
I'm so curious, friend.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. It's hard because even in the work that I do now, there's a structure to it. I mean, I think, being in like that 9 to 5 mentality, you always look for that structure. But I think to break away from that, like, what we're doing now in terms of creating episodes, creating really substantial, in-depth conversations that allows us to connect from a human level and to free flow, and there's no structure to it per se, is one way to do that. um I do think in allowing the for me, like, allowing time to find those bursts of inspirations of creativity, whether that's through a walk, whether that's grounding me into like, ooh, that could be a good episode to chat with Dahlia about, like, and jotting those down and imagining that, the conversations without really formalizing a script is one way to break away from, the typical structure that academia and my training has brought me. um but I do think tapping into more creative spaces, and like yourselves, like what you did with going to that underground performance, and is another way that I can continue to add to my creative toolkit, or creative wellness toolkit, I want to say. um because I remember, like, last year, going to like spoken word or open mics or even like comedy shows. And I think those were like, oh wow, like that was a really creative line. And ooh, let me jot like a quick note of that, or like, wow, that made me feel this. Like that would be an interesting episode to dissect. So I do think intentionally involving myself in other creative spaces like you have with that concert is one way to get out of that structured kind of box or place, where it does allow me to just have more fruitful, free flowing, creative conversations with you and other artists that we or other creatives that we speak with.
Yeah, and friend, I am like smiling as you're chatting because I am thinking back to when we would actually build out a script. Every
Yes.
single conversation, we would
Yeah,
jot down
yeah.
every question that we were gonna ask. We would jot down like
Mhm.
where we were gonna jump in to ask the
Yeah.
question. It was
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very much like almost it was giving essay outline. I couldn't stop thinking about
Just
it.
giving 5 paragraph essay. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
so it does take me back. I think we definitely had, from my perspective too, like you're mentioning in an academic perspective, I definitely came in with very much of a like a business perspective, like,
Exactly.
right,
In
like
business too,
what's our
for sure.
value prop, like what are we achieving here, what's the
Yeah, what's our
business
KPI? Yeah.
plan. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
no, definitely, even now we struggle with this today, where
Mhm,
we're still
mhm.
trying to like, very much like, hey, what are the metrics that we're trying to achieve? What are the goals that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
So I think that is one thing that it makes me laugh, because I do definitely see the progression of that,
Yeah.
where we're jumping on this episode, friend. We have no script. We have
Yeah,
like
yeah,
nothing, maybe a conversation we had prior to jumping on, but really we're like in the flow. We're present. We're
yeah,
like checking in with each other. But yeah, there was definitely a time where we would not be able to do this, where
for
we
sure.
needed an outline. We needed a
Mhm,
very
mhm.
clear, like, understanding of what the call was going to be about.
Mhm,
So I do think from my perspective, that definitely came from my environment, and I work
mm.
in sales and business, and you come into every call and you're like, what's the outcome? What are you trying to get out
Yeah.
of this conversation?
I can relate. Yep, yep,
Yeah. And
definitely.
shout out again to our producer, because they really have challenged us multiple times on this and really pushed us to be in the flow, to really, hit record. They're like, I remember when they first brought it to us and they said, hey,
Mhm,
just
mhm.
jump on the call and just hit record and see what happens.
See what happens, yeah.
And we did, friend. So I guess, as we're thinking about this and we're thinking about the ways that we are taking our creativity to the next level, you
Mhm,
mentioned this and you said this, and I really love the way you worded it. Your
mhm,
creative wellness toolkit.
mhm.
Can you share one or two things outside of what you already said that are in that toolkit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is, like, when I think about creative wellness toolkit, I think one important part is seeing like seeing our archive and seeing like just looking back at, oh my god, that was such a creative flow discussion with this artist, or really looking back into the recordings we've had and re-listening to those episodes and just adding and like finding the creative like kind of nuggets that we took away from the creatives that we spoke to, but also the nuggets that when we have our own episodes, like finding that burst of again like light and creativity and how we just connect that with our own personal journey um is one way that was like one tool that I had in like my creative wellness toolkit. Um, but another creative wellness like toolkit that I have is I do like to like follow other creatives and understand kind of what they find in sense like in terms of inspiration. So I tend to like tab certain websites where similar to like a Pinterest board, but it's like not Pinterest, I forget, like it's called Cosmos or something, where you just like scrolling through like really cool animation, really cool visuals, or something that's very aesthetically pleasing to look at. Sometimes I scroll through just different website that allows for creatives to just get sense of inspiration. Um, and lastly, I do think besides like I think the physical space and the human connection with other creatives is so important because I think like as creatives you need that energy and then that exchange of flowiness, exchange of like vibes in terms of like, oh wow, like what are you working on or what are you like,
Yeah,
so I think that's something that I would love to add on to my creative wellness toolkit is to definitely make more in-person connections with other creatives to just share ideas, like chill and hang out together and just learn about their creative pursuits and journeys because I do think that helps like add on to like my creative, I guess, like juices and get it flowing. So
I
how
love
about
that,
you?
friend.
Like yeah, like how anything in your box of creative toolkits or wellness toolkits?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I will mention two things. So one, I've spoken very much about this, so I won't dive too deeply into it, but like my spirituality in terms of my like
Mm-hmm.
meditation, like that practice is so important for my just creative wellness toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
I told Mary before I jumped on, I've been meditating more consistently these past 2 weeks than I have in the past year. And the
Hmm.
difference that I have felt in terms of inspiration, in terms of just like joy and in the between moments has been so like uplifting, so nice. So definitely that meditation piece has been huge. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing that I would say, and you kind of alluded to this, friend, but being open to connecting and
Mm-hmm.
co-creating with others. We have this really beautiful space, friend, where we co-create, we're present, and we
Mm-hmm.
jump on here, and most of the time we have like no idea what will be the outcome of this conversation, but we're
Mm-hmm.
present, we're engaged, and we're listening. And I'm just excited to open this connection to others, to whether it's like I said, going to shows, going to like farmers markets and talking to other
Yeah.
people that are selling their creative work.
Right.
Yeah, just connecting with others, because the more that I've been more open to that networking piece, but more so from a creative lens where it's like, hey, like show me your art, I'll show you my art
Mm-hmm.
perspective. It's so much more different. Like it really is
Mm-hmm.
very, very different. Um, so that's what I want to continue to do. I want to continue to open myself up to more networking, more opportunities in that, from that perspective of hearing what other people are saying, and then also being open about what I'm doing creatively. Because
Mm-hmm.
like one thing that I noticed, friend, is I'm not as vocal about the podcast. Like I'm not out there being
Mm.
like, "Hey, I have a podcast," and then when
Right,
they ask
right.
me like, "What is it?" and I can talk about it. It's something that I want to work on, and that's a big
Mm.
part of from the business says your pitch and stuff. But I'm
Your
seeing from the
sales pitch.
perspective, yeah, from being confident in the space that
Yeah.
we're creating, from being confident in our podcast and what
Yeah,
we're
I
doing
agree.
here today. So
Yeah.
that's like the one thing. Yeah, those are the two things that I think are I'm really they're in my toolkit.
Yeah.
And of course, it means that I still have to iterate. There's room for improvement, but they're things that have really been helping me be in flow recently.
Yeah. No, I love that, and I definitely resonate with like needing to vocalize that this podcast is our creative project, because I think one like nugget that I've taken from other creatives is the creative itself is their own biggest cheerleader, and if we have to like believe in our product, which is the podcast in this case, in order to really radiate like the vision we have for it, or the creative process we have for it, and continue to allow it to expand its creativity in different realms, whether that's more creatives that's co-creating with us, or that whether it's, you know, us sharing our own creative endeavor, building a logo or our own rebrand. So I think to your point, yeah, I agree with, I definitely will continue to also just say this is something I do on the side. It's something that fulfills me in terms of a creative outlet, creative sense. Um, and see where that goes. Kind of like the more repetition verbally, like putting it out there in the universe, the more that I feel like the more there's the less the imposter syndrome kicks in, because I think it's just a little bit of practice of, as you said, pitching this podcast, but also from that creative lens of, in order for creative juices to flow, we have to continue to really reiterate and emphasize like our own creative project again, with just this podcast and the things we're working on in our own lives. So,
Yeah,
100%
absolutely,
agree.
friend. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, we're aligned there. And I guess I have to ask you a question.
Hmm.
How do you know you're in a creative flow?
Yeah, I love that question, because that's something that I reflect on a lot, and not just from a creative flow, but even just like in a natural personal flow.
Mhm.
But speaking of being in a creative flow, when I feel like super inspired by just the smallest idea of like what I want to bring to the podcast, or the topic I want to talk about with this creative, or just completely losing sense of time of the conversations. Like for example, right now, like that's when I know it's a like, wow, this is like a great creative flow, and the feeling, the conversation, and the end product, which again in this case, like the episode, just felt so aligned all in all, and you just lose track of time. And there's even post recording, there's a sense of that inspiration to like continue creating, even though you're done with the recording. You just want to continue on, like, well, this episode would be great as a follow up to that, that conversation. So I think those are good like signs when I'm in that constant state of creative flow. How about you? Like, what are good, like, I guess, signs for you when you're in your creative flow?
Yeah, that is a very timely question because I feel like I'm in a creative flow at the moment. And the
Mm-hmm.
reasons why I can feel that I'm in a creative flow is because, I talked a little bit about this in the podcast, but like my grandma's passing had the biggest impact on me, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm still obviously like reeling from that, learning from that, and understanding my own personal relationship to the grief that
Mm-hmm.
comes with that. But for the longest time, I felt like in that process, I became very much like focused on my work. I just want to work, 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 and like just focus on that. And I started in the last weeks, months, kind of starting to think about the ways that I could light up my sky in different areas of my life. So,
Mm-hmm.
if I would have the perspective of my work life, you would just imagine a bunch of lights on there because that's where I was putting all the emphasis. I started to try, like I said, to light up different parts of my life in terms of like, hey, I want to go out and socialize more and network and meet new people. I want to go and, like try like a new hobby and pick up a new book, like all these things where it just started building up to the point where, this week, I would say from a high level, I had a tough work week, but I don't feel that way. I feel so
Mm-hmm.
inspired. I feel so in tune with the potential that's in this podcast, the potential that is in this space that we're creating together, friend. And that's when I feel like I'm in a creative flow. I think my
Mm.
problem and my issue with
Mm.
this is that I need more consistency with this flow. I
Yeah.
need like
Yeah.
this flow is like I can say I'm in the flow right now. I'm getting like inspired. I'm hearing like Blackbird on the streets. I'm like that song that resonates and hits me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling all of that like synchronicities, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm welcoming them, but I want to make this tangible. I want to make this a practice as well,
Mm.
where I can yeah, it can be something that's grounded that I can use to, you know, channel energy to the
Yeah. Yeah.
specific projects that we're working on. Because right now it feels very like Lucy spark, like it's like everywhere. It's like I'm throwing like a big
Yeah.
glitter up in the air and it's like making a mess everywhere.
Yeah. No,
um,
I see that.
I want this shine to go to the projects that I care about, which is this space that I'm
Mm.
creating with you, friend.
Mm.
And so that's really where I feel like when I think about my creative flow, I feel like I'm in my creative flow, but I also feel like there's a lot of space to ground that creative flow in that
Yeah.
creative space. Creative Hora is such a perfect space to ground it on
Mm-hmm.
a co-creation level, but there's also room to ground that on an individual level. And so that's what I'm excited to explore. And when I was thinking about this interview with your friend, I was thinking like, damn, what if we ask each other all these questions that we've been throwing at our creators? Like, how would we answer those questions? Like,
Right.
you
Right.
know, and that's what I was really curious about connecting with you today about.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way. It's a great way to like get our creative juices flowing when I mean, we ask the creatives these type of questions. So it is a fun way to again check in with us, like within ourselves as creatives as well. So I do appreciate the conversations, and I love the analogy of it feels like we're just not just we're throwing pixie dust out there, but how do you ground, those the glitter or the pixie dust so that there is consistency in our creative flow, and just, it's not feeling all over the place. So I definitely resonate with that, friend.
Yeah, friend. And, you know, I do think that upon reflection, when our producer first posed this question to us, I thought, what else are we going to talk about? Like, we've talked about ownership. We're taking ownership over the podcast. It's ours. But like I said, when I really thought about that perspective of like, you know, if
Mm.
I was interviewing you and you were interviewing me as creators, like what would be the outcome of that conversation? And
Mhm.
yeah, and I think in this conversation we talked about the challenges that we've had as
Yeah.
creators. We've talked
Yeah.
about what our creative flow looks like. So
Yeah.
friend, what is your next big creative project? What are you working on? Tell us.
Yeah. I won't spill too much. Maybe we'll set it for the next one. But I am excited to, yeah, like this another creative project I'm working on is, and would love to continue to dissect that process in the podcast. Um, some of you may know, but I play recreational basketball with my partner, and we've seen gaps in just women and queer folks sharing like a safe basketball community where it's not male dominated, it's not cis men dominated. So in Maryland, DC, we've found a little bit of gaps there. So we decided to take on this endeavor of creating not only a league but a brand where we create a safe space for women, queer folks to really reconnect with the sport of basketball in different ways, whether it's competitively, casually, or just also to continue to build human to human connection where one commonality we have is through the sport. Um, so yeah, I would love to share more about that process because like we went similar to Creative Hora, we went through like a logo phase. We're going in through like kind of that like what is our vision for this endeavor, this brand, and this space look like. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in and share with you and the audience more about that creative project and brand project that launching here with my partner.
I love that, friend. Such a needed space, for sure. And the fact that you and your partner are taking that initiative to create that space is just so
Yep.
impactful, so powerful. I know what a big like fan lover of basketball you are. And so
Yeah.
to take that passion and that love and just, pour it into something that you really care about, like this community project, is just so you. And so it's just like the most perfect thing for you, friend, for you and Amani.
No, I appreciate that, friend. I'm excited to share more with you and hear from also like other creative projects that you will want to work on or are working on, as we dive into our own creative life projects. So yeah, definitely excited to share with you, friend.
Yes, yes. I won't commit to one specific creative project. The one creative project that I'm fully committed to right now is, like I said, we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but being my own creative life
Yes.
project. What that
Yeah.
means for me at the moment in the present are two things. One, like I am okay, so I my sister had these roller skates and I literally tried them for a bit and then I gave up. I'm
Yes.
gonna pick them up again. And then the second thing that I'm trying to do, I love reading. When I was younger, I always wanted to be a writer, and so I actually like blocked off time on my calendar to just write
Ooh,
anything, like make up a
yes.
story. And so I
Yes.
want to commit to that. Those are two things that, one hobby, whether I do stick with rollerblading or I pick another hobby because I tend to do that. Or, I really do focus on continuing to expand my creative writing muscle because there's so much I want to say, and I
Yeah.
just have to like dedicate that time to write it down, block off that time to
Heck yeah.
express whatever it is that I want to express.
Yeah.
Right now, it's just like I'm just making up a story. I'm like, I'm not writing about myself. I'm not journaling. I'm making up a story. So it's
Yeah.
fun.
I want to hear, yeah, I would love for you to share that whenever that time comes and whenever you're ready to hear like a little like paragraph or even a couple sentences of your creative writing. So I love that, friend.
Yes, I'm excited to share that podcast. People hold me accountable.
Podcast people. Yes, yes. I love it.
So I know that we are nearing the end of this conversation, friend, and we typically
Mm-hmm.
like to end the conversation with our bonfire moment. So we're
Mm-hmm.
envisioning that big, bright fire, and we're gonna, release something into the fire so that it can be transmuted, transformed, and released. So, friend, what are you throwing into the bonfire today?
Yeah, I think it's a great. I love our bonfire moments because it's just a time to like, what am I releasing out there in the universe or letting go? I I definitely think I'm letting go and releasing the structured way of looking at creativity for me,
Hmm.
so that it doesn't impact my creative juices and flow and co-creating with others. So yeah, I want to release that out there in the fire and into the universe, letting that go.
I
What
I love
about you,
that,
friend?
friend.
What are you
Yeah.
releasing out there, letting go?
Yeah, well, today I'm releasing self-doubt when it comes to creativity. I pulled like a weekly card this week, which is like my card of the week, and I'm gonna try to describe it a little bit, but it's like the woman and she has a long, long
Mm-hmm.
braid, and then the braid is covering her
Mm.
eyes. And I feel like that's very much how I felt about my own creativity process. Like I'm literally covering like this lady covering her her
Mm-hmm.
braids covering her eyes. It's like I'm not seeing my creative potential. So that's what I'm releasing. I'm releasing self-doubt. If there is like anything like covering me from seeing my creative potential,
Mm.
expressing that creative potential, I'm releasing that into the fire because, it's with these times, all we have is play and joy. And so we should definitely lean into that.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the visual of yeah, like a woman or this character really using their braid to, or like the braid kind of not blinding them, but I
In a
guess like
way.
in a way, yeah, I guess so. Like, they can't see, but yeah, like releasing that self doubt and that blindfold and really opening it up. So I love that, friend. Love that for you.
Yeah, and to our audience, what are some creative limitations that you're also letting go of? Tell us below.
Thanks for tuning in. Creative Hora is a podcast production hosted by Dalia Zaragoza and Mary Figueroa. This episode is edited by Abdullah Kawish and is produced by akstudio.global.